Let's talk about video game design. Specifically, let's talk about choices in video games. There's a fad. It goes like this. The most important thing you can do is give your players meaningful choices. And that's not even wrong. It completely misunderstands what choices are and the role they play. Let's talk about it. So, back in ye old days, you were lucky to have 20 pixels to represent your character, right? How does this guy feel? What sort of personality does he have? Doesn't have a face? Doesn't have voice clips or animations? He's kind of hard to empathize. How about this? Text adventure games. How can you empathize with this hero? Well, this was a serious problem. If you want to go on an RPG adventure, you want to have vast fights and huge vistas and amazing things, and you want to have all of that proving your mettle and fighting the good fight and all that. Kind of hard to do when this is the level of expression you can get out of your game. So you do the same thing that you do nowadays. You do cutscenes. Of course, you couldn't do visual cutscenes because the computers weren't that advanced, so you would write paragraphs and paragraphs explaining what was happening and how people felt and all that stuff. Well, the computers actually weren't even advanced enough to do that, so you would physically write them. And when you bought the game, you'd buy the book. And as you went through the game, at some point it would say, please turn to page 48 and read paragraph B. And it would be, Doug raises his sword aloft and screams in fury. He hacks down all the harpies until none survive. Vengeance is his. And that sounds great, right? It's personality, adventure, vast vistas. It's all there, right? That's great. It is not great. It did not work. The problem is that it doesn't come around very often. It's been hours since the last time I read a paragraph. And I read that paragraph and I go, Doug isn't angry. Doug just killed off that badass back there, took almost no damage, and got the Sword of Might plus 86. Doug is on top of the world. What the heck is this book talking about? Oh, harpies, right, from 4 hours ago, the thing. Yeah. You lost me. Disconnected. No longer on the same page as the game. I have to decide whether or not I'm playing my version of Doug or your version of Doug. That's not good. How can you keep the player up to date with how Doug is feeling? How can you continue to build Doug's character when you can only talk to the player once every hour or two? So, the answer is you can't. Instead, what you do, you don't tell the player how Doug is feeling. You ask the player how Doug is feeling. And this is the basis of choices. Do you save the village by evacuating it, even though the city itself will be destroyed? Or do you defend the city against all comers, even though you know that the villagers will be damaged and hurt? Which option do you take? Well, in the end, they go back to the same event. There's some small things that happen along the way, and then they're back on the same line, and the choice doesn't really matter very much. But you get to have an adventure, and you get to have your adventure your way. Your character goes on the kind of adventure you want them to go on because you can make a choice between two options that are going to be useful for every kind of character on any kind of adventure. There is no adventurer that would be unwilling to do either of these options. You can always find some excuse to prefer one of these options over the other. And the game doesn't care. The game isn't saying, oh, you choose the cowardly path because you feel afraid. No. The game does not judge you because the game does not know what you're feeling. You could be feeling 100 things, any of 100 things. And the point is that you will assign those emotions in your head and the game won't stop you. You could take this path here because you are a pacifist, or because you don't want to risk any villager dying because you like some of them, or you could take it because you think the enemies are good. They're just misunderstood. Or maybe you take it because you're just physically too torn up to actually take on the enemies at the moment. You lost too much health back in that last dungeon. There are so many reasons you could take this path or the other path, and they're all going to be in character for you. The adventure you want to have with the character you chose to have it with. This has continued and is still the role that choices play today. For example, if I play in a Star Wars game, I might choose to make a Sith character. It's my saber, a Sith character. Or I might choose to make a Jedi character. Make a Twilight Jedi character. Fight. And Star Wars narrows down the adventure quite a bit. I'm not going to be taking anyone on this adventure. It's going to be specific people. The nature of Star Wars always leads to fights between good and evil. So when I go on an adventure, I'm going to be mostly choosing whether or not to bring in a good guy or a bad guy. Or, a character that vacillates or something like that. But the main concern on my mind is always going to be good versus evil. The choices in Knights of the Old Republic or any Star Wars game always reflect that. There's no neutral choice between defending a village or evacuating it. It's always going to be do the good thing or do the bad thing. Because the game has limited my options. It knows that I'm going to be choosing a good guy or a bad guy. Any adventurer I take into Star Wars is going to be obsessed with good or evil, and therefore, any time I get an option to choose good or evil, it validates my choice. I made a good guy, here's a choice where my good guy can do good things. I made a bad guy, here's a choice where my bad guy can do bad things. The problem is, most environments are not quite that clear-cut. For example, we got Mass Effect, right, with Commander Shepard, and she's like, I can choose to be Paragon or Renegade because that worked really well for the Star Wars games. Am I Paragon or am I Renegade? Unfortunately, my Shepards never really gave a shit about that particular set of parameters. Paragon or Renegade has nothing to do with how my Shepard goes through the universe. So, Paragon is more in tune with my vision of Shepard and the kinds of adventures I want to have in the Mass Effect universe. But really, it's not a very good match. And they did this because Star Wars did it, and they thought, good versus evil, well, we'll make it Paragon versus Renegade. So you're going to be good either way, but you're going to be like bad boy good or good boy good. Except those aren't the adventures I want to have, and those aren't the people I want to take on those adventures. When you're making choices in these kinds of games, the whole point isn't just to give the player a choice. In fact, the choosing is secondary. Choosing is a powerful tool, but the point here is to give the players a validation. The character I chose, and the adventure I want. It has nothing to do with good versus evil or Paragon versus Renegade. The only reason that works in Star Wars is because Star Wars limits your choice of adventurer. You are naturally going to want to choose good or evil. And therefore, all of the adventures you're going to go on are going to be related to good or evil. But in something like Mass Effect or Dragon Age, I might choose almost anyone, right? I could have any kind of character I want. And the game doesn't really back that up by giving me options that let me have those characters in those particular adventures. Rather than choosing Paragon or Renegade, it would have been better to give me neutral choices that didn't judge me, so that I could siphon all of the many sorts of adventures and the many sorts of emotions and characters and traits. I could funnel them into those neutral choices in my head, without the game assuming that I was playing a Renegade or a Paragon. That said, QuickTime Paragon Renegade events are actually kind of fun. I can go into that some other time. Similarly, Dragon Age, they have a situation where they give you a lot of choices on more spectrums, like freedom versus duty and stuff like that. But normally speaking, you end up just choosing whatever choices you think will appeal to your buddies. rather than choosing choices that make sense to your character. Does that make those invalid? No, not at all. Because the point here is that we're not talking about choices. We've never been talking about choices. I never look at good versus evil option and say, which of these am I going to choose? This is such a hard set of options. No, I always choose the one that makes sense for my character and my adventure, right? They're not choices. They're just, this is a list of paths and you're going to choose the one that makes sense for you. Well, what else is a list of paths that you're going to choose the ones that make sense? Well, in Dragon Age, it's your crew. You take along 2 people. So if I want to play an elf, then it pigeonholes me into playing a particular kind of character. I'm playing this kind of downtrodden character who's come out of the barrens or the whatever they call them, and just has no resources or friends or anything like that. And I've got to fight my way to the top. And that's the adventure that it assigns me. But if I decide to give that some nuance, if I decide that I'm going to be an elf that is kind of a chatty Cathy, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to be brazen and talk a lot and swear at people and just be hilariously vulgar and all that stuff. The game doesn't actually give me any choices that let me do that. But the game lets me choose characters that represent that for me. So, for example, I can always choose that dwarf. And guess what? There you go. Now my adventure is being properly represented. My character isn't going to be as aggressive as I want them to be when it comes to being chatty and sweary and charming and cunning and all that. But I naturally get conversations with the dwarf that do have those elements, and therefore I get in a lot of those kinds of conversations. I feel like I'm having that kind of character. I feel like I have that kind of adventure, and moreover, I may end up on paths that are specific to that particular party member, where I can feel that kind of adventure bleeding through. So you're not limited to choices in the sense of, dialogue trees. There are so many more ways that you can choose to validate your player. Validate your player's character and the player's adventure, the one they want to go on and the character they've chosen, not the one you've assigned them. Now, if you want to limit the kinds of characters and adventures that your players are likely to go on, you can do that. If you want to unlimit it, you're going to need to choose how to let those feelings still get validated, probably through a combination of neutral choices and other options, such as choosing secondary characters and stuff. Either way, we need to stop calling these choices because they are not. Even when they, pop up on the screen and it's A or B, it's not really a choice. It's just a set of paths. These are validation methods, and they've always been player validation methods. And there are a lot of ways to do this. And that's all I wanted to say. Let me know what you think.